Kia ora, haere mai everybody. Hello and welcome to our panel. Today we'll be discussing inclusion and diversity in strategy games and how that can influence a game being developed and the studio where that game is being made. My name is Emily. I'm a narrative designer and games writer at Balancing Monkey Games. And before we delve into the topic, I'm going to introduce you to all the lovely people that are sitting on this panel today. Jevon, do you want to start with yourself? Can you tell us about you and give us a little elevator pitch for your game and tell us about the studio that you work at?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Kia ora. My name is Jevon, right? I'm based here in Wellington. I'm the solo developer for the base building simulation game called Adaptory. So in Adaptory, you've got a crew of 4 explorers. They've crash landed on a planet, and you have to help them get off the planet by getting them to dig resources and build machines, look after their needs, and eventually get off the planet. I'm the solo developer on the game in my little studio called Stormcloak Games here in Wellington, but I do work with some contractors around the world.
Oh my gosh, you're a solo developer. Good on you. More power to you and good luck. So the rest of us here are from Balancing Monkey Games. Anna, you are our intrepid managing director. Can you tell us about yourself, our studio, and the game that we're making?
Oh gosh, that's a lot, but yes, I can. So kia ora, my name's Anna Barham. I'm the managing director of Balancing Monkey Games. My husband Sam Barham is the creative director, and the games that we've worked on so far have kind of been his brainchildren before we leave, and now we're working on Beyond These Stars. And for us, were we talking a little bit about diversity and inclusion yet, or are we putting that off to a little bit later?
Oh, we're going to dive into that very soon, but I want to hear about Beyond These Stars, please. A game that I definitely don't know anything about.
So Beyond These Stars is the sequel to Before We Leave. It is a city building game set on the back of a giant whale that's traveling through space. So you're building your town and managing your resources and so on the back of this intelligent creature as it travels the galaxy. So it's been a really exciting and interesting project to be part of. And I'm really looking forward to talking more about some of the design decisions that have gone into that.
Well, it's very convenient that you've just mentioned design decisions because we have our lovely game designer here today, Mariana. Hi, bestie. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do at the studio?
Kia ora, ko Naitarangi te iwi, ko Mariana Johnston toku ingoa. Hi, I am Mariana Johnston, and as Emily well signposted, I am the game designer, and I also do a bit of UI UX design at Balancing Monkey Games. And I have been working on Beyond These Stars since its inception. It is a massive project, the biggest one that I have been part of to date. And I'm really proud of how it's coming along and how the studio commitment to diversity and inclusion has influenced the way the game is being made.
Love that. And for our international viewers, what was that thing that you did at the start, right after you said kia ora and Mariana?
So that was my pepeha. I am Māori, mixed Māori Pākehā. So my pepeha was introducing my iwi, or the tribe that I belong to identify my whakapapa, or my ancestry, and the way that I connect to the whenua, the land of Aotearoa.
Thank you. Yeah, a lot of people internationally have a fascination with Māori culture. I think it's been fetishized a little bit in media, so it's cool to see you giving like an explanation of like, hey, this is actually like a snapshot into how the culture works and like some really important foundations of it. Hey, speaking of Aotearoa, we all live here, so Aotearoa is a Māori name for New Zealand. So we'll probably call New Zealand that through the space of the talk. It's a gorgeous name, way cooler than New Zealand, if I can be spicy as an Australian. So yeah, we all live here in New Zealand. And I think, and well, actually I believe that the majority of developers here are very proud of the industry that we have here. I find that we punch pretty high above our weight, and we have some excellent developers and studios here. I'd like to have a quick conversation about games made in New Zealand, so our listeners can understand why we're worth paying attention to. Can you all tell me about some games that you like that have been made here?
I mean, I'm quite new to the industry, so I've only been
Mm.
in professional game dev for, I think this is my third year. But in that time, I would describe New Zealand's game dev industry as really close, really well
Mm.
connected. Like we all know each other. We're all there to support each other. We're not competing for the same eyeballs. We're here to support everyone, and I love that about this industry.
It is nice, isn't it? Everyone truly does know everyone too.
Mhm.
New Zealand is pretty small. I think the population's like 5-6 million, maybe. And so there's a stereotype here that's like, everyone knows everyone. A lot of Kiwis don't like it. You guys can please feel free to disagree with me. But everyone truly does know everyone in and outside of the games industry, so it does create this nice feeling of closeness, huh?
Yeah, but in terms of like games that come from New Zealand, the ones that come to mind, like there's Dredge, obviously.
Mm,
There's Path of
mhm,
Exile. Like I couldn't
mm.
believe that was from just Auckland. That game.
Yeah, they're just down the road from me, which is wild. So cool.
We've just had Abiotic Factor come out and do amazingly well.
Mhm.
It's Only Money by The Usual Suspects is another one that's been a lot of fun recently. And yeah, The Usual Suspects, one of their developers plays D&D with us. So, just a need poti poti.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. There's also Rocketworks who make DayZ. They're in Auckland as well, in a very nice office overlooking the gorgeous harbour. And there's also Tales of the Shire, which is Weta's new game that's coming out soon. Yeah, I've forgotten so many. Oh, Mini Motorways, Mini Metro. There's so many here.
I'm gonna give a quick
So,
shout out to Umarangi Generation, which was made by
oh
a
my
cousin of
god.
mine, Tali Faulkner, which is a really, really cool, it's really like slick and modern photography game that you can pick up on either Switch or PC about a future alternate world Tauranga. So
Mhm.
that's definitely one to check out. It's been out for a while.
It's such a cool game. It's a very diverse game as well in terms of like how it fits in with the genres around it. Um, Speaking of signposting, as you mentioned before, MJ, I'm gonna slide into our next topic, which is what is D&I or diversity and inclusion. I know that this tends to be a pretty nebulous topic sometimes, and it's also a topic that can be misunderstood and manipulated. But for me, I suppose what it comes down to is the phrase "nothing about us without us." So I'd love to hear everybody else's thoughts about what diversity and inclusion means to you all.
Yeah, that nothing about us without us is a phrase that's important to me. So I think that was originally coined in the sort of disability space, of people doing things for the disabled community rather than with. And so for us at Balancing Monkey Games, it's really important that we don't do things out of performative activism. We're not rainbow washing ourselves to look good. We actually believe that diversity, hiring diversity, including people, making everybody feel welcome and able to do their best work is just basic business common sense. So in our guiding principles document, which we formulated together with the team last year, one of our sentences is we respect all humans and support diversity in all its forms, including neuro, age, ability, origin, gender, and sexuality. So there's a whole broad spectrum of what diversity includes. The first thing that comes to mind these days probably is gender and sexuality, but that's only a really small part of what diversity and inclusion looks like. For us, for Sam and I, as the founders of the studio and setting up our studio culture, so we're both Christians, and for us, one of our guiding principles comes from, there's a Bible verse, Galatians 3, verses 28 and 29, verses 28, which is, there is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. So for us, we believe that everyone is equal, everybody needs an equal chance to shine. And so that means sometimes that we need to offer extra support to those who haven't had that chance in the past.
Well said, Anna. Thank you. Wow. You managed to wrap that up in a nice little bow without waffling. Well done. That was amazing. Jevon, as a solo developer, can you talk about what it looks like for you? Because I imagine it's pretty hard to kind of have some guiding principles for a studio of about, one some contractors.
Not really. I am very lucky to work with some contractors. But the way that I work with contractors is exactly how I'd want to work as a studio, is about making sure that I try my hardest to have the most diverse representation, the most diverse voices, like the widest diversity of contributions into the game. And unfortunately, because we're still really small, I can't afford to hire people long term. But I can still make those decisions with contractors. And it's still a guiding principle for every decision that I do make in the game, in the design of the game, how it's presented to the players, how I communicate with the community, all of those things.
That's fantastic. And I think that is a view that might actually be a little bit uncommon in the industry. We do tend to treat contractors as other. So it's like, okay, we're going to treat our employees this way. And then we'll just, the contractors, they're over there, whatever. So it's really nice to hear you, discuss those principles that you have and to hear about how they influence you and your burgeoning studio and the contractors as well.
Thank you.
You touched on something very interesting that I do want to dive into throughout this talk. I think is going to be like kind of the thesis. How do those principles affect this strategy game that you're making? That's a big question, I know. So let's just open the floor up and have a nice old discussion about it, because it's very intricate.
So like to the design of the game or the way that it's communicated? There's
all
so
of that.
much. Yeah. So in Adaptory, so for example, I approach diversity in the sense that Adaptory is a game that has diversity, but it's not a game about diversity. Like the characters in the game are diverse, and the diversity helps unlock different interactions and different experiences, but it doesn't limit any of the characters in the game to what they can or cannot do. So that is one of the ways that, for example, diversity is in Adaptory, is that you have diverse characters, but it doesn't limit what they can do.
MJ, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think that we ended up taking a fairly similar approach to making diversity within like the actual diegetic game world part of Beyond These Stars. It's one of those aspects of how our systems work that could pretty easily come across as just like a happy coincidence, but it was very much not. It was a choice. That the character generation in our game is very deliberately randomized so that the physical traits, the skin color, the hairstyles, the vocal sounds of all of our peeps are randomized. So you could have a character that's wearing a pink jumpsuit and has bobble hair and any kind of skin tone, and they could have a higher voice or a lower voice. All of those combinations are randomized, and the names that we've given the characters in the game are also deliberately androgynous as well. So in terms of interpreting the presentation of any of the civilization, like any of the peeps in your civilization, that's up to the player and how they read them. And that was a choice that we made rather than deliberately coding in male names and female names and male body types and female body types, so that the people of your game would be quite naturally diverse.
Mm-hmm. Lovely, thank you. Anna, do you have any thoughts you want to pop on at the end there?
I don't think so. I would have liked to have wheelchair peeps in my game as well, but it turned out that was much more complex. You know that joke. There's a meme going around about, can we have a giant explosion here, please? And the programmers are like, yep, sweet. And then you go, and can the main character wear a scarf? And they're like, "Ugh." It turned out to be one of those decisions that was much
Yeah.
more complex than we initially thought.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's something where we've tried to just be really open, and put that as the kind of, it underpins the design really, rather than being a thought that's added later.
Yeah. We had our design week, oh my god, back in January 2022. And I do remember like these sorts of conversations. Yeah, I know, right? Let's not even get into that. And I do recall a lot of these conversations just flowing like a current throughout the week. It was sort of like an evolving thing. Let's move on to our next question, if that's all right. Any further thoughts before we move on?
Well, there
Mhm.
was one other aspect of
Ooh.
D&I that contributed to the design of Adaptory. So very
Mhm.
early on, we decided that in Adaptory there wasn't going to be any combat, there wasn't going to be any violence. And that was
Oh.
intentional because in the genre of base building, simulation, strategy games, there's a long history of having colonialism, having conquest, having different like previous cultures that you're dominating basically, and we very intentionally decided to not include that in Adaptory. And that has made the design space smaller, but also meant that we're exploring different aspects of challenge that other games may not have considered before. And that also
Oh,
like
that's a
that,
beautiful
yeah,
segue. Carry on,
it
sorry.
increases accessibility, increases diversity and inclusion. So that's another thing that we included in Adaptory.
Yeah,
Oh
Mediana.
man.
that's been a part of the design of Beyond These Stars as well, because as you raised, the 4X framework in strategy games is inherently colonialist. I mean, exploit is one of those X's, isn't it? So creating games that can provide a similar game feel to the players who want to play that 4X style without replicating those colonialist frameworks is a really interesting challenge. But doing that is so worthwhile because it is massive for accessibility and inclusion, particularly for the cultures that have been on the wrong side of those approaches, right? So, like
100%.
myself, I would rather play a game that doesn't make me take on the role of the people who oppressed and subjugated my ancestors, Like, we want people playing our games to feel like they can identify with what they're doing. And a lot of people don't want to identify with that subjugation of other cultures. And yeah, like other things that the like is kind of ripe for the picking in strategy games in terms of like making things more accessible and more inclusive is exploring those other cultures as well, because there's quite a lot of strategy games that have a very European world building and lifting up developers from other cultures to tell their stories and to bring their perspective, their unique perspectives that aren't the one that's been told so many times already, is massive from a diversity standpoint, which will then bring in new players who are interested in seeing something that reflects themselves or reflects something that they haven't seen before.
Well said. Oh my goodness. Really
I was
quickly.
just wondering, Emily, if you would like to talk more about this. So you're our narrative designer. And so this is something obviously that has gone through your mind a great deal over the last couple of years. I just wondered if you could bring your perspective to the specific topic of colonialism.
Oh man. Let me just exit MC mode and enter narrative designer mode.
Sorry.
Wow. No, don't sweat it. It's okay. You don't have to say sorry. So it's been a really interesting experience, this evolution that I've gone through as, you know, a white woman living in 2 countries that have undergone extremely negative experiences from European explorers, first Australia, now New Zealand, Aotearoa. And I worked on Before We Leave, which is our first game here at Balancing Monkey Games, which is non-violent. There are some colonial tropes, but I feel like it really started to move the needle. Shout out to Sam, our creative director, who worked on the narrative and the story for that game, and inspired me for this game. I think the main thing that I've really focused on throughout this project is, are the peeps allowed to be on Kewa? Kewa is our secondary protagonist, or deuteragonist, if you want to be fancy about it. They are the whale that you travel on the back of through space. And I really never, ever, ever wanted there to be a forced presence on Kewa. Yes, they're sentient, but the idea of a group of people boarding, for lack of a better word, the back of a creature without permission, consent, and that sort of thing really, really didn't sit right with me. And so in terms of that, the peeps, who are the populace that live on the back of Kewa, and the people that emerge from the shelters and rebuild their civilization in our first game Before We Leave, go on this journey of, like, wait a minute, is it actually okay for us to be here? And so I've written, or am trying to write, watch this space, their journey from being like, everything's fine, don't worry about it, and not really thinking about their presence, the effect that they're having, to the opposite end where they start understanding the impact that they have on the world around them, which is something I think that is reflected in our culture today, where we're beginning to really understand, oh, okay, so for every action, there is a consequence in my personal life, in my community, and in the world around me. And of course, I'm talking about climate change, and those sorts of things. Can I just backtrack a little bit, actually? I'm going to enter MC mode again and ask, what the heck is colonialism? We keep talking about it, but what is it actually? Does anyone have like a nice little academic definition that they can rattle off for me? Because I can't do it. It's a big one, huh?
I mean, I'm still learning about this myself, but I understand it as this idea that an existing culture is inferior compared to another culture, and the secondary culture comes and enforces their beliefs, their structures, their systems over the first one in an effort to take them into their culture, something like that.
That's a pretty solid definition without being too academic, actually. And an addendum that I add to that is that indigeneity is probably something I'm better suited to give a definition of. But indigeneity cannot be separated from colonialism. People are indigenous because they have been colonized. It's a term, so colonization, the colonizer, the people that they have colonized are the indigenous in that equation. So when a group talks about themselves being indigenous, that's because they've experienced colonization, and it's about talking about their relationship to that oppressive culture that tried to assimilate or destroy the original indigenous culture.
That sounds really familiar. Oh, sorry,
the
MJ,
reason I'm
keep
talking
going.
about this is because of just having recently attended Wanaka Whakareoi Awhenua, which was the Indigenous Game Developers Summit that was held here in Otepoti. And as a side note, I think that it's so cool that something like that happened here in Otepoti, just, this town at the bottom of New Zealand, that we had that here is amazing. It was a wonderful week, and we spent a lot of time focusing very specifically on indigeneity. But obviously that's a massive part of my personal perspective when it comes to diversity and inclusion in games, because as somebody Indigenous, all of my work comes from that perspective. It's not something that I can remove. So inclusion of that perspective is an inherent part of my game design and informs the way that I choose to care about diversity and inclusion of other groups as well.
Very well said. And if I may be spicy for a moment, I actually think these conversations and this train of thought makes better games, because we're moving into an era where how many games come out on Steam every day? It's like in the hundreds, right?
It's a lot.
Let's not think about it, because that sounds like existential dread to me as developers, and we're not going to think about it. But there's such a saturation of video games that people can just play whenever the heck they want, often for not that much money. Like, prices are pretty competitive, if you ask me.
I was thinking the other day, I spend almost more on Netflix than I do on video games. So I need to buy more video games.
That's the correct thing to take away from that realization.
Not that Netflix is overpriced.
Hey everybody, forget about the rest of the talk. Buy video games instead of Netflix. Huh? Consider. Thank you very much for coming, Olvio. Well, I was going to say something else and I've completely forgotten. Oh yes, that's right. There's like such a saturation of games these days. Where it's really important to play things that are different. So having conversations about diversity, which isn't just like, being a woman in games and that sort of thing. Having these conversations about diversity in your studio will just straight up make a better video game, because you'll introduce different mechanics, different themes, different storylines. Please feel free to elaborate on that.
Absolutely. Like, as a tiny indie studio, the earlier I get feedback in the design process and the implementation process, the cheaper it is to get something changed. So if I have a diverse team, they're providing diverse inputs before it gets to players, which allows me to fix bugs and address issues and address accessibility way before it gets to players, which makes it a lot cheaper. So it makes business sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also not just about like the design of the game from purely like a systems and mechanics standpoint either. It's like you just touched on there, Jevon. It's also about the accessibility. So in terms of making games and making them stand out, making games that can be played with just a mouse, making games that have really good control rebinding, so that if people are using alternative hardware, because that's what makes it easier or more comfortable for them to play a game, that they can rebind it in a way that suits them. Making games that consider cognitive load and try to parcel out information and make information readily accessible or repeatable, so that if you're somebody who has problems with memory, you can easily get back up to speed. Or even if you're just somebody who is really busy and only gets the chance to play this game once every 2 weeks, having to remember everything would suck. So all of that sort of stuff, when you add accessibility into your game, it makes it so much easier for such a wide variety of people to play your game and have fun with your game, which is ultimately what you want, right? Like, you want as many people as possible to play and enjoy your game. That's what we want as game developers. So it's just smart.
Yeah, as someone who has suffered from balance issues in the past and visual triggered migraines, I'm just really grateful for the little things like being able to turn off background motion, being able to change the color of my pointer from blue to yellow. Just little things like that make the game so much more playable. And for me personally, and also I'm, as you said, I'm one of those people who doesn't get to play games very often. So when I do, I can never remember what I'm supposed to be doing. So having those little reminders is vital. And I know that I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
I
So
think one
I'm.
thing that
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, in our studio, besides like ethnic diversity, gender diversity, 3 of us on the team are parents. So we know what it's like to have those kind of demands on your time and your cognitive load. We've got neurodiversity within the team, so we know what it's like, and we've got people in the team who are always having to deal with those, the kind of cognitive load issues. And so, sure, Microsoft has put out a fantastic list, right, of how to do diversity, but having that represented in your studio makes it like you don't even think about not doing it. It's not a nice to have. It's not an add-on. It's written into the core of the game.
I was about to mention that as well. So I'm very lucky to be a brand new parent. Little Serena is now 8 weeks
congratulations.
old. Thank you.
Oh,
But as a result, my game playing has totally changed. So I used to be, 3-4 hour sessions, keyboard, mouse, just totally in the zone. And now I'm lucky if I have one hand and I need to pause the game all the time. So I've been playing a lot of Balatro because you can play that
hey,
holding
let's
a
go.
baby. Yeah.
I love that. Oh my gosh, congratulations, Jevon. That's so nice. I
Thank you.
have a lovely story from one of my friends from a long time ago who had twins. Speaking of twins, we were talking about twins before the call started. And he would play World of Warcraft and nurse one of his girls, put her down, get the other one, and then nurse the other. And he had a great time because you can play World of Warcraft with just a mouse. And it kept him sane through what was a really, really, really tough time. So like we said, accessibility benefits literally everybody. Oh gosh, I was going to say something and I've completely lost my train of thought because I was thinking about my friend nursing his twins and it was really, really
I
cute.
think there's a specific name for when accessibility options benefit the community as a
Yes.
whole.
Being
Curb
super cool.
cutting, I think. I mean, true, but curb cutting, I think, because the corner of curbs being cut when you're at a intersection or something like that is done mostly for wheelchair accessibility. However, it benefits parents who need to be pushing around a pram. It benefits people who are dragging a suitcase around with them because it means that they don't have to be lifting a suitcase on and off the curb. So it's, that phrase, the idea that making allowances for accessibilities just ultimately improves the life of everybody because there are so many situations where those, allowances are just useful. Even if they're not something that you need all the time, there's a lot of people who need mobility aids or other sorts of assistance temporarily, as well as people who need them all the time. And so making sure that those people who need them all the time always have what they need is just good for everybody who also only needs them sometimes.
We've talked a lot about diversity and inclusion and now accessibility, which is obviously a part of that in quite broad terms for video games, period. But what do you all think about those topics specifically for the strategy genre? Especially accessibility, because my goodness, strategy games are quite challenging. I know that we had a pretty tough time with like rebinding keyboard controls for Before We Leave when it got ported to Xbox. That was pretty brutal. Do you have any thoughts around that, team? That's a big one, I know, I'm so sorry.
That's okay. So with the strategy genre specifically, if we're talking about like accessibility, strategy games tend to be incredibly complex and with quite sharp learning curves. And depending on the type of game that you're playing, I feel like historically there's been a little bit of a just kind of like this is the way it is sort of approach, just kind of like
Yes.
get good, deal with it. Um,
Yep.
And if you can't figure it out, then that's your fault for not being good enough. And I think that there's a lot of satisfaction in being able to create a plan and execute it. And strategy games onboarding people who are new to the genre particularly, with really solid tutorialization, building things up slowly rather than just being like, here's all the systems and like a massive paragraph of text, read it and go play, is something that is getting a lot better, and I hope that it continues to get better as well, because if people want to play a strategy game, they should have the opportunity to learn it in a way that doesn't expect them to get everything immediately and then go forth. And if you can't, then tough luck.
Yeah, I'd really like
Absolutely.
to actually give props to you, MJ, and Emily, because between you, you've made a tutorial for Beyond These Stars, which is one of the things that was really highlighted by our streamers and players as being a really, really excellent example of a tutorial done well. So we worked so hard on that. These guys polished and edited and changed and tweaked so many times. And now we've got a tutorial which it steps you through in a way that's really accessible. At the same time, it conveys the flavour and the feeling of the game and hints at the story to come. So I'm really, really proud of what you guys have managed to achieve in that space. And I think anyone who's watching that's interested in this should actually come and play the demo of Beyond These Stars to see how to do a strategy tutorial really well. So
Yes, I actually
It's
want
a
to
great case
redo
study.
the tutorials for Adapters. At the moment, it's like pop up, do this thing, do this thing, do this thing. But I want to change it to quests. So I want to play your game to see how you've done it, because it sounds really, really good. Get some
Oh my
ideas.
gosh. Thanks,
I mean,
team.
there's definitely a little bit of do this, do this, do this. But in terms of, so quick context, before Balancing Monkey hired me, I was actually working as a tutor. I was tutoring the game dev course at Massey in Wellington. So teaching is something that I have experience in. And in particular, teaching game development and then also teaching programming. So Programming 101 was one of the courses that I tutored. And if you're somebody who knows how to code, then it's a very particular way of thinking. And teaching that way of thinking can be really challenging. So bringing those learnings about learning and learnings about teaching into the tutorial was really important for me when I was writing all of the teaching text. Things like reiterating a concept a little ways down the line. So, teaching, this is how something works. Do the thing. Later on being like, remember, this is how that thing works. Go do it again. So that people get that reminder, because if they've been off doing something else, they may have forgotten that it works this way, or just that reinforcement of an idea, but letting people do the thing themselves while still just providing that information, providing that extra support, instead of introducing something and then being like, cool, you've learned that, move on. And yeah, it's a very interesting thing. I could probably do an entire panel about learning and different teaching styles and the ways that game tutorials can adapt to
sounds like an NZGDC talk to me.
the way that game tutorials can teach different types of players. And there's so many things that I wish that we had had the time to be able to do to make the best tutorial possible, but we are all beholden to deadlines. But yeah.
Very true. I'm thinking about tutorials as you talk, and my partner, who was the archetypal gamer, he's very white. Sorry, honey. He's straight and he's a man. And he says, and it's interesting seeing his reaction to tutorials these days as a man in his 30s who has a lot of responsibility, and a lot of things on his mind. And our friends group have followed the same trend, who are also very much like him. He doesn't want anything to do with these tutorials that like give you massive chunks of text and don't explain things, where they're just like information and then it shuts, and then you have to like dig through options to find a log for the information. And I think that this touches on what we were talking about earlier, right? Where it's like actually accessibility benefits everybody, even the majority audience of gamers, especially because of how, we're aging and where the bulk of the money sits in terms of like who's actually buying games. But that's a topic for another time. Do you all have any thoughts on that before we move on? Excellent. Less thoughts. Do you have any thoughts about my partner playing games? Less that and more. Do you have any thoughts about like the topic in general? I didn't frame that very well, sorry. Oh. Well, I think we've covered a lot. I want to open the floor to you all. Is there anything that you want to talk about that we haven't covered yet that might not necessarily be in my handy dandy little document here? It's okay if you don't. I have lots of questions.
And I think one thing which may come up, I don't know what questions you've got, but one of the things that's most on my mind, on my heart as a studio manager, is about how to get a diverse
Yes.
studio, diverse and
Yes,
inclusive
please.
company and studio. And I think, the most obvious thing is everything you do have the end in mind. And then it's a matter of listening to people and hearing what their needs are and then meeting them. So, yeah, like when we were, and Jevon, I'm not sure how you particularly approach this with contractors. When we've been doing our hiring, I actually had a field on my spreadsheet for, whether they represented groups that we didn't have in our studio, and I'd give people points, and then people with more points would get ranked more highly. It sounds awfully mechanical and artificial, but sometimes you have to be mechanical and artificial and do things that feel maybe a little bit uncomfortable in order to get the results that you want. And we've had a lot of discussions in the studio about how we can make this company work for everyone. We've got a lot of people on the team who are neurodiverse in different ways and have different needs because of their different styles of neurodiversity. We've got people who have different life backgrounds. As soon as we had 3 women in the office, I rented a sanitary bin for the toilet. We've introduced menstrual and menopausal leave, which is applicable to everyone who's affected by it, which is not necessarily the biologically female members of the team either, because people who have partners can also be affected. And so we've done a whole lot of things to the way we run meetings and all this. There's a lot of different bits and pieces that we have come up with to try and make the studio a place that's comfortable, and a place that everyone's able to do their best work in. So that's my personal focus. I'm not the person that's making the game. I'm the person that's trying to help everybody as they make the game. So Jevon, I'd love to know your thoughts on how you manage to get that diversity in your contract team.
I'm very much trying to do the exact same thing, just with a contractor bend. So very lucky to work with 4 incredible contractors. So I've got Cass, who's working on story. She's based here in Wellington. I've got Care, who's working on the art. They're based in Chicago. I've got Sai, who's working on the music, and he's based in Palmerston North. And I've got Mika, who's working on the sound, and they're based in Melbourne. And the way that I approach contractors is very much I want to enable them to do the best work that they can. So giving them as much leeway and as much space as possible to make decisions and to take ownership over what they're working on. And when I'm looking for contractors, when I'm able to fund a contractor, I do look for multiple people at the same time. So, for example, I was looking for a sound designer. And so I reached out to a whole bunch of different sound design peeps and contacts. And through that process, I managed to find, like, a majority of them were let's say, well represented in the industry. But I did manage to find Mika, who I really connected well with. And so it's not just getting the first contractor that you find, or getting the cheapest, but finding the one that gels with your studio the most and represents some aspect of diversity, and working hard to do that. And that's helped a lot.
Do
I'd like to
you?
talk about this from a perspective that's not at the level of like the studio already exists and the people that we want to hire already exist. It's about finding them. It's about something that I'm personally passionate about is knowing that people from diverse backgrounds do not have the same opportunity to gain the skills necessary to hire them to be part of these studios. And so something that I care a lot about is being involved in communities and providing the ability for the rangatahi, the children of those communities, to gain the skills in areas that they may not find accessible because of socioeconomic status, location, not having support from family because they're not part of these worlds. But reaching out to those groups and providing them with the opportunity to gain the skills so that they can bring their unique stories and backgrounds into this industry, because it will make it better. But that's never going to happen if it doesn't start at that level of knowing that there are some groups who are just going to find it easier to become a game developer than others. And if we can't solve that inequity when they're younger, it becomes way, way harder once you're an adult and you've got bills to pay, you know?
Yeah, I have a strong preference as well for trying to work with people who may not have all the skills, but are keen to learn. I love working with people who are like, this is the first time I've done this, or the second time I've done this. I want to build my skills, and I love to give them the opportunity to do that. So it's also very
The
important.
majority of our studio do not have experience or training in game development. A lot of us have got sort of tangentially related degrees. For example, our technical artist has a degree in photography. Our producer had worked in theatre production before coming to us, and so on. And one of the things that Balancing Monkey Games love doing when we have the time is actually going and visiting schools. Or having school groups come and visit the studio. When we set up our office, I deliberately chose an office in the part of town which is one of the lower socioeconomic demographic in the city, in fact in the country. And we have been to visit the schools in this particular area to meet with the kids and to say, let's see what you're doing. Here's a possibility that you might not have thought of. Do you know how many different kind of games there are in game dev? Have you thought that could potentially be you? We also offer mentoring at the Polytech level. We've been to visit Otago Girls High School with their team of girls working on developing their own projects, and that was just so exciting, seeing what these kids are making and the ideas that they have. And I love being at that end of it as well, and just trying to be inspiring to people who might not have thought of this as an option. Because it is a relatively accessible career path. You know, all you need is an internet connection and a computer, and you can do this from anywhere. One of the things that makes me sad actually is that our studio has got this big flight of stairs to get in, so it's not physically accessible. But you can do this from home. I mean, as Emily is testament to, you know, she's always worked from home. You don't have to be able to go into an office. You don't need to be physically mobile. If you've got a computer and an internet connection you can use, you can be a game developer if that's what your passion is. And we want to be the inspiration and what support we can provide to help people do that.
Same here. Everyone working on Adaptory is working from home. working on their own hours, working with their own devices, and yeah, I try to make sure that everyone can work in the way that's most comfortable for them.
I think you've touched on something that I've been sitting here mulling over, which is how can you have D&I or diversity and inclusion and accessibility in your studio and your game on a budget? Because it sounds so cutthroat, but Anna, you touched on this earlier with our peeps not necessarily being able to be in a wheelchair, which is something we all really, really, really wanted, because we literally do not have the time and the budget to implement it into the game. But what you've been talking about, making affordances and also doing things like talking to your local community and visiting schools and chatting to hopefully the next generation of game developers is something that you can do that is really cheap. And it has an impact and it will influence your game and it will influence your studio as well. Are there any other things that you can do to make your game as diverse, as inclusive, and as accessible as possible on a tight budget as an indie developer?
And one of the things, so when Sam was starting out, he did a course, Pro Indie Dev does a course called Finish Good Games That Sell, which we highly recommend. They think we're great as well. They're constantly talking about us and their
Thanks.
materials, which is quite funny. But one of the things that they talk about there is like these kind of, and MJ can probably talk about this more, using hacks to get as much content as possible out of your time. And choosing a genre, an art style and stuff where you can exceed expectations. So you set the expectations and then at the point that you can exceed them. And it's, I mean, simple things like MJ's talked about, having randomized names, colors, voices for the peeps doesn't cost a lot of time. Doesn't cost a lot of programming power. It's just this little tiny thing that you can do, and voila, we've got inclusion. So it's about thinking smart and beginning with the end in mind. As Jevon said, if you try and change things later, that's when it gets really expensive. If you start at the start with that as part of your end goal, I mean, the other thing too, from a management perspective, is you're not thinking just about a single bottom line. You're not only thinking about the money that you'll make. I think I learned there's a triple bottom line. For a studio, even an industry, to be successful in the long term, you cannot just be thinking about the money that you'll make in the short term, because that's not a sustainable way to do business. So if you want to be a flash in the pan, then sure, burn your people out, for the sake of making money. But if you want to be a company that's going to last, that's going to be making games into the future, then you need to be working sustainably for your staff, and you also need to be working sustainably for the planet. So sometimes it is about balancing, deciding that actually that massive payout at the end is less important to me than sustainability and functioning over the long term. So yeah, I guess it depends what's important to you and where your priorities are.
Yeah, one of the reasons
The
I
expert
switched.
phrase.
Yeah, one of the reasons I switched from software development, web development to game development is because it is sustainable long term. It is cheap to make video games. There's very little climate impact with conventional single player games. So that's why I made the jump. Another way that I found to cheaply get diversity and inclusion feedback is to do playtesting at conferences, at events, and actually listen to the players, see what they're doing, see where they're struggling, put weight into diverse opinions. So, for example, a player in my community said, "Can you turn off the stars moving in the background?" Like, that was a one-line fix, and it's made the game so much more accessible to so many more people,
Thank you.
more players. Yeah. And I had no idea. That was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, continuing on from what Jevon's just touched on, your community is a free resource. provided you put the work in on the ground floor to make sure that your community is a safe, welcoming place for
Yes.
people of all kinds.
Mm-hmm.
Because
100%.
if you make a game that you want to have this diversity and inclusion be a part of it, and when you're on the ground floor, when you're still making it, if you're going to be, opening it up for beta testing playing, putting in the effort early on when you're starting to build that community to make sure that people from all backgrounds, all different types of capability, sexuality, gender, all that sort of stuff, feel comfortable and supported coming into your community. And then being like, hey, you guys who want to play my game, who are a interesting and diverse group of people who will have a lot of varying different perspectives, would you like to play my game and give me feedback? Like, that doesn't take money. That just takes caring and your time and effort in investing into your community, which is something that you should always do anyways, because they are
Absolutely.
everything to you
Yeah.
in your game. Yes. Do you have opinions on this, Miss Community Manager?
Yes.
Community
So
Manager?
for context, I was the community manager for Bouncing Monkey Games for a very long time before I moved into narrative and writing. I'm just sitting here like, that's exactly right. You have to build your community with being inclusive in mind. And when you build a community like that, you also have to be very intolerant of intolerance.
Mhm.
So making a space where you make it extremely crystal clear, we're actually not going to tolerate any sort of bullying or hate speech or anything like that, is so valuable, because the people who are underrepresented in communities in gaming will then come to you and your community will thrive for it. And even the people who are overrepresented, or just, or should I say, just represented in games, will probably like it more as well. It comes back to what we were talking about with accessibility. When you put accessibility into a game, everyone likes it. What's that really nice saying? I think it's like a rising tide makes all the boats rise. Right? Thank you, MJ. I was sitting here like, yeah, 100%, 100%. This is great advice.
Yep, I
Yeah,
love my
Emily was
community.
the
Amazing.
Emily was the second person that we hired. So the first person that we hired was an extra programmer to help us get Before We Leave finished, and then the second person that we hired was our community manager, because we knew the importance and the value of community. And yeah, it was a really, really good decision that I'm so glad that we made.
Too, frankly. Yeah, that was pretty good for me as well. Anyway, 4.5 years later, I'm just part of the furniture now, huh? Oh my goodness. I have some more questions. I sourced these ones from our internal community at Balancing Monkey Games, because I'll be frank, I ran out of things to ask. I was going to say before, actually, when you said it depends, Anna, I'm like, that's the expert thing to say. When you get to a certain point of skill and you start saying, oh, it depends, that's when you know a lot about the topic. But it's also really difficult, because you run into the expert problem where you're like, wait, how do I talk about this to a layman? So I went to a few people internally, and they gave me some very good questions. Shout out to Nina, and also shout out to Leah, who's our current community manager, who also helped put this talk together. Thank you, Leah. Tell me, are there any other games or any other kinds of media that have influenced your feelings and views on diversity, equity, and inclusion?
I'll quickly mention that I love the game Oxygen Not Included,
Oh,
and
great
it blew
game.
me away that in the game they have a gender field, F, M, and X. That was the first time I'd seen in a strategy game like a non-binary representation, and that blew me away. So that was just one field was a huge inspiration for me.
Thank you, Clay. They make great games.
Yeah,
Legendary
they
studio.
really do.
I'm trying to think about it too now.
I mean, I love how in Baldur's Gate you can
Oh.
have just the diversity of everything put together. I remember, I think it was, Payday? You could have a different visual representation to your voice, and that blew me away. This was a long time ago. I think it was Payday.
I loved Mass Effect, honestly. The fact, I think that was the first game that I had seen where you can choose the gender of your protagonist. And I mean, it was it's fairly early on, but, watching my husband choose and commit. See, I'm useless at any games which actually involve hand-eye coordination. So we played Mass Effect with Sam driving and then me picking the conversation options sitting next to him. But I actually honestly appreciated that the voice acting for the female shepherd was better than the voice acting for the male shepherd. And that there was like a variety of romance options in that one, which again, that was the first time I had seen that. And now it's kind of standard. So seeing that grow in games has been really, really cool. Another example of seeing diversity, which is just kind of chucked in there with no comment, is Bridgerton, where we've got this, it's kind of like an AU historical romance, but there's black and white people in equal status.
What's AU, really quickly? Can you explain AU
Alternate
to me
universe.
real fast?
Alternate universe. Yeah, you can't watch Bridgerton thinking it's a historical romance. It is not. It's not period drama, not really. It's fantasy period drama.
Love it.
Oh, what was the other? There was another example of that. Even in The Expanse, where people can use their own accents, where you've got this Maori woman playing one of my favourite characters in the Expanse series, and she's got a Kiwi accent. She just uses her Kiwi voice, and it's like, yeah. I'm just really loving actually seeing that more and more. We're getting to see more and more actors using their own voices and not having to put on some fake American or fake English accent to get roles. It's just been so delightful to me as a Kiwi.
I think
Another game. Sorry.
sorry. I think actually I'm gonna throw back to one of the OGs and talk about the Dark Souls series, actually.
Oh, hell yeah, let's go.
And Dark Souls, even the original games, allowed you to choose between being male and female, and also allowed you to choose what body type you wanted to have, whether you wanted to be very slim, mid-sized, or thick, and that was the same for male or female. And this was purely aesthetic. It was about player representation, players being able to create what they wanted to see in their character. And what you chose had zero bearing on how you played the game, right? So you could build your character to look the way that you wanted to look. And it didn't have a debuff for being female, for example, which was a thing in some games back then. And I was watching my husband play Dark Souls 3 last night, and he picked up a piece of loot and he was like, oh, I got the trans ring. And I was like, what? And he was like, oh, it's a ring that if I put it on, it changes my gender. That's all it does. Because gender doesn't have any bearing on how you play in Dark Souls. It's just, if for some reason, mid-game, you decided that you wanted to run around as the other gender from what you picked at the beginning of the game, that exists. You can do that. Which, it's the kind of thing that was added because they could put this sort of mechanic into the game. It doesn't change the gameplay at all. It's just, if you want to be gender fluid in Dark Souls, you can. And I think that that's really cool. Especially for such an old and long-running series.
It reminded me of the VR game, Star Trek Bridge Command, I think it was. I can't remember the title correctly, but there was a slider in the game where you could change your height. So you're in a VR game and you could change how tall you were in the game. And that let me experience, because I'm 6 foot, and that let me experience what the world would be like as someone who was 5 foot. And I thought that was fascinating and cool and such a unique experience, and like from a programming side, super simple to implement. That was also
my
like really
goodness.
stuck with me. Yeah.
That is something that I've never really thought about, but it frustrates me so much that car seats are designed for people who are this tall and not this tall. So I always have to turn the headrests backwards. And dining chairs are designed for people who are this tall, not this tall, and so they're always too high for my little short legs. It's, yeah, you don't think about these things. Even hand dryers, right? The hand dryers in my gym are constantly turning off for me because the sensor is set just a little bit further than is suitable for the size of my hand. So that's a little digression for you.
Don't get me started on that. I'm looking at my guitar right now, being like, I wish you were made for me. You cursed instrument. How dare you? Have you all
This
ever tried to
assumption that we
play?
have male hands and
Ugh, tell me about it. Actually, shout out to my guitar teacher who pointed that out. I was like, thank you so much for being one of the only people who has ever expressed to me that, like, instruments, amongst other things, are made for, tall men. And not for, I don't know, 164 centimeter tall women. Don't know why I'm mentioning that number. Just am. Definitely not my height. Definitely not a sore spot. I'm actually sitting in my chair right now, which is a gaming chair. And it's too big for me because I'm little. I'm closer to hell. That's why I'm angry. Hey,
Very,
that's
very
the first.
fair.
What was that? Sorry, Jevin?
Very fair. Very,
Yeah.
yeah. It
We're
should
getting
be.
off topic though. Oh my goodness.
my
Actually,
bad.
you mentioned Star Trek, Jevin. I'm so
Yes.
pleased. I love Star Trek. I'm a Star
Oh,
Trek girly through
I
and through.
grew up on Voyager and DS9.
Oh my gosh, we have to talk offline about Deep Space Nine. What a great series. It's definitely influencing my writing for Beyond Their Stars as well. It's got such amazing grey morality through the series. We could do a talk about it. We could
Oh
truly.
yeah, yeah.
We're
Voyager
just
is like,
rewatching it now.
yeah. Voyager
Yeah.
described like taught me how to be a leader.
Oh, that's amazing. Oh man, we definitely got to do a talk about Star Trek together, you and me. I love it. Oh, it's so good. And it definitely influenced me as well.
Mhm.
As a little, as a little teenager living in rural Australia who didn't really know much about anything, watching Star Trek, it really did radicalize me.
Mm-hmm. Same.
I don't know if anyone expected that. I know I didn't, but shout out to Captain Sisko and Captain Picard. So I think we're reaching the end of our talk. I have one more question. We've already touched on this a little bit, but I just wanted to circle back. I find strategy games intimidating, and I often get turned off by how hard they are, even though I really want to play one. How are we aiding players at different skill levels in our games specifically?
So we've already talked about our tutorial, which you can have turned on or off, and we have difficulty settings as well. How many resources you get back when you demolish things, stuff like that. I don't know exactly. MJ will have the specifics at her fingertips, I'm sure. But Jevin, I'd be really interested to hear about what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm definitely revisiting the tutorials to be more of a quest-based system. I think hopefully will help. So I want the game to be accessible by players who have never played a strategy game before, that have played very few games. I want the tutorial system to help them get through to a state where the game is stable, but not just a tutorial where they're like following instructions, but where they have autonomy in how they follow those instructions. But this is still in the planning stage. So watch the space next year. There'll be a brand new tutorial system.
Fantastic.
Nice.
Love it.
Something that I actually thought about a lot when writing our tutorial was signposting for players. And I'm going to briefly tangent into talking about Breath of the Wild, actually, which obviously Breath of the Wild was a fantastic game and everybody loved it. So many 10 out of 10s, no notes. But something that I thought was really interesting about the communication in that game is how much of it seemingly relied on existing knowledge of what certain things mean in games. In particular, things like red barrels meaning it'll explode when you shoot it, or a different texture in a wall meaning that you can destroy that portion of the wall if you blow it up with a bomb, all those sorts of things. Which, if you have experience playing games, that's very clear signposting because it's something that you're expected to know. It's a convention, right? Something that you're expected to know from having played other games before. But if you're brand new, if Breath of the Wild was the first game you've ever played, would you pick up on that? Would you notice that? Would you understand those symbols? So when it came to thinking about how to communicate our mechanics, it was really interesting having to like constantly check myself and be like, okay, am I assuming that people will understand something that is actually just me going, well, it's always meant this in the context of games. So therefore, if you don't have that context, you're not going to have that same level of understanding. And that's a big part of accessibility as well, just because you have no idea who this player is, what they know, where they're coming from, and also what symbols mean to them. So things like in some cultures, there isn't a meaningful distinction between the colors blue and green. And because culturally they don't have a distinction between those colors, the way that they view those colors is actually different from cultures that do have a distinction between blue and green. So if you are using those colors in your game to communicate certain things, then is that an issue? Like, is there something else that you need to add to make sure that your point still gets across? Are you adequately explaining what these symbols and information that you're giving actually means to your player?
That was very succinct. I can always tell that you did lecturing at university. Like, that's a teacher right there. I recognize that. I wish you'd been my teacher in game dev uni. That would have been wonderful. To cap off our wonderful panel, thank you all so much. Is there anything that you would like to say to a person who's like, I don't need diversity and inclusion in my video games, that's all mumbo jumbo?
Have fun making less money then, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're a
Yep.
player thinking you don't need or want diversity, like, why are you shutting yourself off to all these new experiences, these new challenges, these new like environments? Like, are you happy just playing the same game over and over again? There's so many more stories that have never been shared, never been told.
I mean, that's fine. Like, if you just want to make games that make you feel comfortable, and you just want to play games that make you feel comfortable, I mean, that's fine. You're welcome to do that. Just let those of us who feel differently do what we want to do. You do you, man. Yep.
Very Gen X of you. You do
Well, it's
you,
like,
boo.
it's that whole thing, like, you know, people coming in and commenting on stuff that they don't like. It's like, you don't actually have to look at that. You don't have to be there. Go hang out in your own space. I don't care. Let us do what we're going to do, and we'll take the people who want to come with us. And you just take half the world. We'll take everybody else.
Yeah. Oh, that's another talk in and of itself. I have some opinions on that from like a social media perspective, and how like the mixing of communities is like quite a new thing because humanity has generally been pretty siloed. And now with all this wonderful melting pot that we have, there's like a lot of chafing that's coming with it. I think I agree.
Although,
I think if someone was like, "Man, I hate the peeps. They suck." I'm like, yeah, you know what? They do actually suck at some points through the game. That's the story that I'm writing, baby. But like you can take that energy and like go elsewhere with it. That's completely fine. Because at the end of the day, having people be a bit cross with you or like not liking what you're doing, that's also diversity. If everyone likes it, you might have a problem.
Yeah.
I think my feeling on it is just that it's like, if you don't want to be part of this space, then that's your choice. But realize that the space is growing and will only continue to grow, because that's the point of diversity and inclusion. It's letting more and more people exist in this space. And if you don't want to be part of that space, then the space that you're in is going to shrink, because this one is filling up what's available. So get with it, or just
What's that lovely expression?
comfortable in your little area.
To the privileged, equality feels like oppression. Is that
Yeah,
it? To the
yeah,
privileged,
because
equality feels like oppression. Oppression is
yeah,
the word I'm
because
trying
it
to get
feels
out.
like
Yeah.
something being taken away from you. And uh, if you want to view it like that, then sure. But in all honesty, it would be a lot nicer if you just joined in with the rest of us, because we're having a pretty good time.
Come
Yeah.
and hang out.
Yes.
Come and hang out. It takes all sorts. Just
Mhm.
please don't be hateful. That's all I ask. Is there anything else you would like to say, team? Anything you want to spruik, which is an Australian word for, how do I explain spruiking? Showing off, tell us about.
Out
If,
your game. Come and play
Mhm.
Beyond These Stars. Join our
and
community.
Adaptory as well.
And Adaptory.
Yeah, if you're thinking about getting into game dev, and you identify diverse in any way, like we want you to be part of this
Yeah.
community.
Mm.
There are so many different types of roles that it's very hard to find diverse peeps of. Things like technical artists and UI artists and sound designers. Like we want you to be in this space, so please come join us.
I'd also like
Please.
to give a shout out to Code, Centre of Digital Excellence
Yes.
in Dunedin, they're a body which was given funding by the New Zealand government, and they've been incredibly supportive of the New Zealand, particularly Ōtepoti Dunedin game dev industry. We wouldn't be where we are without them, and they have been
Same.
astonishingly supportive of diversity and inclusion. What they have done about including Māori perspectives and gender and all of those kind of things has just been like they're a really good example of how to do it well. And I'm just really, really grateful for their support. So Tim and V and Lauren, you guys are awesome.
Yes. Yes,
Um,
Navi as well,
wonderful.
and Anthony up in Auckland.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, Adaptory has totally changed with Code support. So thank you, Code.
yeah.
Amen. I don't think we'd be here without them.
Yeah,
I think
for
the
sure.
the thing that I'd like to say is that if you're somebody watching this panel on a computer at a library, on your work provided phone, on the school libraries, if you are someone who an internet connection and a computer is actually a barrier for you, something that you cannot access at your home, we also still want you, especially you,
Mhm.
because you also have unique perspectives and a unique background and a wonderful creative presence to bring to the industry. And it is way harder, and that sucks, but we want you to come to the industry. We want you to reach out. We want you to make yourself known in any way that you can to access whatever's around you in your community, to fight for it, and I'll fight for it. Send me an email, mediana@bouncymonkeygames.com. I will do anything that I can to help people who want to make games, because it is harder for some people than it is for others, but that doesn't mean that you
Amen.
shouldn't have your chance.
It's-
Yeah.
Amen. Amen. I think I'll jump in on that as well, MJ. There's no wrong way to make a game, and it doesn't have to be perfect. Just you can, like, if I'm bored at an airport with a family member or my partner, we'll play like games with our hands. Like, can you touch my hand before I move it away? That sort of thing. That's it. That's a game. And those are the sorts of things that our ancestors would have been doing when they were bored. The oldest game is from ancient Mesopotamia, and it's like 4,000 years old or something wild. And it's like a board with stones. And they had a great time playing it. Hey, you can do that too. Play is such an important part of the human experience. So don't be scared to make anything you want to make. Just have fun and see where you can go with it. Try and finish it though. That's my recommendation. If you want to be serious about it, that's something that us game developers are not very good at when we're working by ourselves.
You can make
And
video games in Google Sheets and Google Drive. Like
Yep.
my first games were in Excel because they had a little programming language called Visual Basic for applications. And so you can make games with anything. You can make
You
games
can.
with HTML, you can make games with websites like Discord bots. There's so many options. There's no right or wrong.
Yeah, or pieces of paper even. You can do like a paper prototype and then whack it in an engine later on. And you can also make things like visual novels and visual stories in tools like Twine. They might not be particularly strategic, but if you figure out a way to do it in Twine, let us know. That would be really, really cool, actually. And I suppose to cap it all off, please wishlist Adaptory, and please wishlist Beyond These Stars. And if you want to play Before We Leave, that's also available too. Everybody, thank you so much for joining, and thank you TactiCon for organizing this panel. We really appreciate you. Thank you for all the work that you do in this space. It's very appreciated. I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much, everybody.
Well,
And
thank
if you're watching, have a
you.
lovely day.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you very much.